One quick note before we get started today. This episode originally published in December of 2018. Hope you enjoy. Thanks. Welcome to 10,000 Tacos. If you are new to the show, 10,000 Tacos is a podcast about a family who ran a successful food truck business in Northern California. It's a collection of short stories of those experiences and the many lessons learned having gone through that. It's also a podcast that pays a tribute to a pair of taqueros who sacrificed tremendously to give their children a better life. I'm Isidro Salas, and I'm proud to say that pair of taqueros, they are my parents. This show is a tribute to them. Thank you for joining us today. On the show today, it is that time of the year. If you look around, almost everywhere you go, you will see festive lights, crowds gathering at Christmas parks, packed ice rinks, and of course, tons of suckers. I mean, people at shopping malls. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to call suckers. Anyway, yes, the holiday season is in full swing. No doubt about it. Every year, this time of year, you see that kind of stuff. But there is another season that is also in full swing. A type of activity that involves tons of minutes of prep time, perhaps tons of pair of hands, and definitely tons of love, graciousness, and tons of gratitude. The season I'm referring to is Tamale season. Most call it Tamales, just making tamales. Others call it Tamaladas. They're events where people gather to make tamales. So you hear that a lot. We're making tamales. Making tamales around this time is special to a lot of people. It's a time to gather around in a small kitchen and spend the next several hours making tamales, making memories. And we're not just making a dozen or two. When people gather around to make tamales, we're talking about big numbers here. In some cases, some people will make up to hundreds. And the unique thing about this, you literally have to prepare them one by one. Now, the season unofficially starts in the first weekend of December, and it usually culminates around the 24th or 25th of December. I say usually because many of these seasons end well into the new year. You're talking into January, February, and in some cases even into March. One of the reasons for this is because, like I mentioned earlier, that so many tamales get made that people usually store some in their freezers and will eat them well into the year. And unlike a taco, which a taco needs to be eaten right there and then, right? You can't just save a taco for later on because the tortilla will be soggy and it won't be good. Tacos are meant to be eaten right there and then. But unlike a taco, tamales could last a long time. Just don't tell my mom I said that. I just pulled some out of my freezer. I had buried them and stuff and totally kind of forgot about them. And you can't throw them away, so you just got to eat them. So I, of course, let them thaw and almost finished them off. But she'd get a wee bit upset if she knew that I didn't eat them all, right? Especially now that I'm about ready to receive the new shipment of fresh tamales coming through. I mean, I could almost hear that truck, backing up, the doot, 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 and me looking down at my purchase order and saying, yeah, no, this scheduled shipment is for today. No, really, it's almost like that when I get a delivery of tamales. It's a big deal. But anyway, tamale season, it's a very special time of the year, like I mentioned earlier, and it not just for the obvious reasons. I mean, it coinciding with Christmas, and not that Christmas is not important, but remember, tamales date way before Christmas. And again, it doesn't mean that they are more important, but they do predate the birth of Christ. So, what is so special about this tradition? Well, for starters, making tamales, as I alluded to earlier, just a little while ago, it's estimated to have started happening around 9,000 years ago. Give or take, right? Give or take a few thousand years. Google doesn't go back that far, so we can't say for sure, because Google sabe todo. It knows everything. Google is the new comadre. If anybody knows what a comadre is, a comadre knows everything. So when you ask a comadre anything, they know, they sabe todo. And that's Google. Facebook's becoming that way too. And Amazon. But anyway, again, what I'm saying, it predates Columbus. Predates the Europeans came to this land. So it's believed that the ancient Mayans, the Aztecs, the Olmecs, the Incas, all packed tamales in their travels and in their conquest of other lands and other tribes. It was an easy way to pack the necessary nourishment for these monumental tasks. In short, tamales, just like their twin, the tortilla, have a deep-rooted tradition, and they've helped get us to where we are now. I do wholeheartedly believe that. A little later, I'll tell you a short story of why I have a special connection to tamales and why that means a lot to me. But first, let's talk a little bit about this type of delight. I call it a delight because it is, and in some cases, tamales are dessert. My mom used to make them with sugar. They were sweet. Oh, man. Tamales are not easy to make. Sure, today you can buy the prepackaged masa flour and mix it with the water to make the dough, which is called masa. Not masa dough. It's not masa dough, just saying. It's just masa by itself. Because I hear a lot of people referring to it like, no, that's masa dough. It's almost like on a separate thing, but mariachi. People call it a mariachi band. It is not a mariachi band. It is just called mariachi. And masa is the same way. You don't have to say dough after it. It's just masa. Please do that. Anyway, even though they you could make them a lot easier than it was in the old times, they're still very hard to make because it involves a lot of time and effort. But I think that this is where the special meaning of tamale season comes into play. So I want to bring on somebody who I have actually been wanting to talk to about a few other things, but tamales comes to mind because way before I started the podcast, as I was planning on launching a podcast, I remember thinking, okay, what am I going to do? And I'm going to interview people and blah, blah, blah. And one of the things I thought about in the culture and the thing that I was formulating in my head was I wanted to interview some of my friends. I have a great group of friends that I've known for going on 30 years now. And we still all get together and talk, and we still hang out. And it's a very special thing. But one of the things that I had in mind was I wanted to bring together three of my good friends who have gotten together to make tamales every year. And I kind of saw that happening and when I first started launching the podcast, but it never came to fruition. But now that I've gotten more into my second season, it just came to me that instead of interviewing my friends, I was going to interview one of my friend's moms, because she is the one that puts us together. When my friends get together to do it, she hosts it. So I wanted to bring on Libby. Libby is my good friend Lori and Denise. Libby's her mom. And I thought I'd bring you a little bit about their tradition on how and what tamales means to them.
Well, the reason why we make tamales, it's tradition. And tamales is something that brings the family together. There's, everyone has a recipe. Each family has a recipe. And our recipe is unique. Every family's recipe is unique. And it's just something that we've just done since I can remember. I mean, all my life. My grandmother's and my grandmother's mother did it. And
can you share with us a little how it all got started for you?
So what I shared with my daughters in my cookbook that I gave them a couple of years ago was my grandmother worked, she sold tamales, and that's how she made a lot of her living. She would sell tamales at least 6 months out of the year. But she used my brothers and sisters and I as manual labor. And what we did every Fridays, we'd go over there and we'd make tamales, and we'd come home on Sunday. And we did this, and it was just expected of us. It was just...
Did you have a choice in the matter?
We didn't have a choice back then. We just did it because Mom said we had to go, and we did. And we spread tamales. She was very meticulous about her tamales. I found that different families make tamales different. I've learned that. And my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, made them she was from Mexico, made them very fat and big with a lot of beef in them. And my grandmother, who was from Del Rio, Texas, made them like cigars. Remember, a dozen had to fit in a brown bag. They weren't very big, and they were wrapped. She was very meticulous about the teaspoon of meat she put in each one and the way she rolled it. They all had to be the same size, and they all had to fit in the bag. She would count every single one as she put it in the freezer, and she'd count the money. I remember her counting her money, just making sure she had done what was worth it, I guess. I mean, she was making a living off it. That's what she did.
Did you guys get any of those earnings?
No, never. Never.
Breeding? Besides
never. I know she meant well. It was just a way of living back then. And I hated tamales. I hated tamales until I was like probably a junior or senior in high school, because I couldn't stand the sight of them because we did this all the time. But I also want you to know that I learned how to make really good tamales out of it. I learned a lot of recipes. I learned how to mix things. I learned that not only one person can make a tamale. A tamale has to be made by lots of people, lots of hearts. A couple of years ago, my brothers and sisters were busy, and I said to my other sister, Margot, I says, you know what? Let's just make tamales. This way we'll relieve everyone from the task. You and I will make them. My brother Danny came over. We made them. We went over to my nephew's house for Christmas Eve, and James, my nephew, said, Aunt Libby, I really love your tamales. I love our tamales, but these aren't our tamales. They're missing something. And then he said, I think they're missing some love. And he was right. Because we hadn't gotten together and cried and laughed, and whatever we do in these 4 hours of making tamales, because everything's prepared. I do the meat, my brother does the masa, my sisters does the chili, and everybody brings something to the table. So we really only have like 4 strong hours of spreading masa. And we didn't do any of that. And everyone had said that was probably what we were missing, was the love.
So, how did it get started with Lori, Denise, and the rest of the girls? How did that get started?
Well, I always lived with my mom. I lived with my mom, me and the girls. We lived there in the house after the girls came back from school. And we ended up, my mom was still making them, and to help her out, we would help because I knew she wanted to make them. She wanted to keep the tradition going. And I remember her always measuring. Toward the end, I had like wax papers, and she would say this much of baking powder, this much of salt, and I'd have her drop it in a piece of wax paper so I could measure it. And that's how I really got the recipe for making tamales, is making sure that the measurements weren't lost. That's, so what we did is I brought them to the table with me. I said, you're going to make tamales if you like it or not. I did. I told them.
Did they have the similar thing as you did, like where they didn't like it? Or
No, they were a little bit more spoiled. They were a little bit more spoiled, especially Laura. Laura didn't really, Denise was always a really good helper, but Laura, she'd get a headache or something, no. I don't know if you want to put, but yeah, I mean, she likes making tamales now, because now we make it with Bridget, Lisa, and Tati, and we come together every year, and I have a tamale day for them.
So can you tell me a little bit of what impact it had? What happened during that tough time when you lost your mother? How did that keep going? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I lost my mom in 2014, and she died in December, and that was the first year in my whole life we had never made tamales. And it was really sad, but she died so close to the holiday that we couldn't make them. So I can't even remember if we bought them that year. But I do remember we had Christmas. I think my nephew Brandon might have made roast beef or something. But I still felt lost, like something was missing. And my mom's birthday's in March. So I decided that for her birthday that following year, we'd get together and we'd have tamales. And I didn't want to go the year without not making them. It's just, there's, for Hispanics, Latinos, food is very important. What we put on the table is coming from our hearts. I love cooking, and I do it because it's a part of me, who I am.
You wrote this book for your girls. Why did you do that?
I didn't want them to lose the formula. I needed to make sure that I had the formula, because they come from both grandmothers, and they come from my mother. It's just like all together, they're just one, that formula. It was really, I don't know if anybody else felt that way. It's such a, it's just such a beautiful formula that my grandmother gave my mother, and her mother gave her, and I've tried to carry it on. I've tried tamales with my brother Ross. We did tamales until we got them right. We think they're right. I lost Ross this year, but until we got them right, and it was really important that my children carry that on. I really do.
That is really, really good stuff, Libby. That is an awesome way to put an end to this conversation. I really, really want to thank you for making time for us and for just giving me your perspective, sharing it with our audience, because it's really cool. So I'd like to thank you for being on the podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Tamale season is steeped with traditions. Getting together with loved ones to make these wonderful pieces of delight, one by one, just like the days that we live, one at a time. That's why they're special to me. And that is all for this episode. This is a very special time of the year, not just because it's tamale making season and it's Christmas and it's the holidays and whatever you or however you celebrate these years. Just remember one thing. Do yourself a favor. You cannot drink from an empty cup. You have to take care of yourself first before you help others. Helping others makes people feel good, makes me feel good. But you can't do that unless you take care of yourself. So as a Christmas present, to me, your health would be the greatest gift that you could give me. Thanks again for joining us. Have a very safe New Year. I'm Isidro Salas, and this is 10,000 Tacos.